We're here in this special session primarily because we ended our regular session without agreement on the executive branch budget. And since the end of our session in mid-April, myself, along with you, Mr. Speaker, and members of House leadership, and with the consultation of our subcommittee chairs and many members of this body, have been working diligently over the past few weeks to get to this point that we could come to this special session to pass an executive branch budget. The governor, in meetings with him, made some recommendations that we thought were very good, and we took most of his recommendations, if not all, or not all, but virtually all of his recommendations, and worked those around agreements that we thought we had with the Senate, and we believe that we had with the Senate on the executive branch budget that we left at the end of the session, and incorporated all of those into this bill. A few highlights that I want to point out about this bill. As most of you know, this House voted overwhelmingly to support a jobs creation component of our budget bill, Kentucky Jobs for Kentucky Families. A large component of that dealt with the building of Category 4 and Category 5 schools. We now know that we cannot reach agreement on the construction of all of those schools. And in looking at the governor's budget that he, or his recommendation that he sent to us, and although it included Category 5 schools, it did not include an adequate funding formula to build all of the category schools. His funding formula would have equalized, it would have required every district that had a Category 5 school to pass an additional nickel on their property tax. That we would equalize, but we know, Mr. Speaker, that more than half of the counties in our state, 6 out of 12, that have a Category 5 school cannot build their school on an equalized nickel. Gentlemen from Harris and gentlemen from Mason, we know that that is the case, and that cannot happen without additional bonding money, without an additional bonding pool that this House supports. We support that. But in the end, Mr. Speaker, I believe that we feel here in the House it's important that we build all of those schools, not just some of those schools, and that the formula that we use and that the bonding capacity that we have in this budget bill should lead us to a plan that will build all of the schools, not just some of the schools. And therefore, we're going to recommend at this point that none of these schools be included in this plan, but at the same time, we're going to take some of the savings from that equalization and put it into a study that we will do in the Legislative Research Commission that will be controlled and handled, and a request for proposal will be issued through the Legislative Research Commission, because much of the problem we had with the Category 5 and 4 schools was the confidence we had in those plans and in the categorization of those schools. We believe with this study that now we will have great confidence in the schools that are in most need. And I don't think anyone really questions the needs of the Category 5 schools. Most of us understand and recognize that those schools need to be built, that we have children in our state in buildings that are inadequate and unsafe. But this study will allow us to work on that, and hopefully in the coming months, and hopefully by the time we're here next January, that we will be able to have a plan that will help us move forward, not just on the Category 5 schools, but all of the schools. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that we note that this budget fully restores SEEK and even projects growth in the second year of our SEEK formula. I think that is important to our House members. We have never, Mr. Speaker, since the Kentucky Education Reform Act that many of you, or some of you, voted on in 1990, we have never cut the SEEK formula. The General Assembly has not, and we can say today that we still have not cut the SEEK formula. We're going to fully restore Medicaid, gentlemen from Hardin, to continue to reap the rewards of the enhanced match that we're getting from Congress and being able to use that money to help our most vulnerable citizens. We're going to restore the KEYS scholarships, which are important to all of our students. Every student can qualify for a KEYS scholarship based on their high school history. And so we think it's important that we continue to, that is restored. These are all things that are important to this House. We're going to ask we are going to agree to keep the 2 additional instructional days. We will pay for one at the state level. We'll ask the school districts to pay for the others. And then most of state government beyond that, Mr. Speaker, will be subject to a 1.5% cut the first year, a 1% cut the second year to help us balance this budget, with the exception, I believe, of higher education, and their first year cut will be 1.4%. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, that will leave us a bottom line, a balance of about $30 million. So we have been able to accomplish this and still have some money in reserve. Now, after we pass the transportation budget in a few minutes, it'll have a public transportation component, which is funded from the general fund. That'll take about $10 million of that. So in the end, we will balance with about $20 million. Mr. Speaker, I think this budget reflects, and I don't think anyone in anyone's district in this state can say that state government has not tightened its belt. The revenue bill we passed, or this bill, does not include any new taxes. Not any, not one. It requires state government to tighten its belt, and it's not just what we're doing in this bill, but what we've done in the last year and a half. We have had 2 budget reduction orders that have reduced the size of state government. Many of our agencies are going to see these 1.5% and 1% cuts on top of the cuts they've already taken. So some of them are going to be really challenged to deliver the services they are required to deliver, and we need to recognize that. Mr. Speaker, this budget, when passed, will represent about $1.2 billion below our spending level in 2009. Now think about that. Most of us are business people back in our districts, and we know the costs have risen and will continue to rise. But the amount of revenue that we are going to appropriate is going to be $1.2 billion below where we have been or where we were in 2009.